this is our philosophy with Substack, which is like, look, technology is neither good nor bad. It's just powerful. There's nothing that prevents you from leaving other than we're just consistently giving value.
How do you prevent Substack from becoming a Nazi bar while also deciding your chosen lines about what content you'll host and what you won't?
Hi, Rabble.
Hey, Alice.
So this week we have co-founder Chris Best from Substack on, and Substack is a company that seems to be making its own headlines these days, which maybe is a sign of its maturity. It raised $100 million recently at a purported $1.1 billion valuation. And then just in the last week is in the headlines again for pushing alerts around Nazi content. So what gives, Rabble?
Yeah, absolutely. So Substack has become a unicorn, and they are increasingly important in the media ecosystem. And they also have made a bunch of decisions. They've made a bunch of decisions about their platform, about their market, about their economic incentives. And Chris really talks about that. Like, what are they doing and why? They've decided to build a promotion ecosystem to cross-promote content and drive people into conversations. And that's what got them into trouble this week, where they started doing push notifications for neo-Nazi content that their algorithm had serviced and they thought was gaining attention, and, you know, full on swastikas, the whole deal. And that came back to bite them. And it's made the conversation about free speech, the conversation about platforms, the conversation about who do you allow on your platforms and who do you monetize so clear, because they're trying to build this broad audience. They're trying to meet the needs of creators, and you can't meet everyone's needs.
So last week we had Yoel Roth on the podcast talking about content moderation, trust and safety. How does Substack handle these issues?
Substack has this controversial political view, which is that they want to support all content and they want to remove as little as possible. They do remove content, but it's mostly because of the economic and platform constraints on Substack as a business. They remove content that would be considered spamming, that would cause deliverability problems with emails. They remove content that would cause them to have problems with Apple and Google's app stores. And they don't remove neo-Nazi content because there's no advertiser pressure. And that's the real reason that this content has gotten removed from other social media platforms. Chris talks about how he wants everyone to have a voice, and he wants to support creators, and he wants to know that they won't be deplatformed. And the irony is that they will deplatform people because of economic and political pressure. But it's not the pressure of people not wanting to see neo-Nazi content that can pressure advertisers. It's the pressure of what happens if their emails don't get delivered? What happens if their app gets removed to the App Store? And right now, there's no economic pressure around whether or not they have this, far-right content.
Okay, well, let's listen to your conversation.
I am super excited to talk to you, Chris, and welcome to my show.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
I'd love to know a little bit more about the history of where you're getting at and how you guys created Substack and what you're thinking about. And I know that you are someone who has spent a lot of time thinking about the history of Twitter and where it came from and the social media. But I want to tell you a little story that I don't think anyone's told publicly, which was in the early days of us thinking about creating Blue Sky. So this is before Jay was named CEO, before there was a separate company incorporated, when there was just a group of people saying, hey, how could Twitter be a protocol? We had this idea of a Rebel alliance. And basically, they were a combination of open source people and protocol people, and then the smaller social platforms that weren't Meta, or weren't Meta and TikTok. And it was combining sort of Twitter and Blue Sky and Reddit, and then Substack was an obvious person to add on that. And unfortunately, the Rebel Alliance fell apart in Blue Sky Reddit discussions. And at the time, Reddit was like, oh, well, we will provide right to exit. We will provide the ability for these subreddits with their mods to leave. And then they got really into cryptocurrency and were all about the tokens, and they lost the right to exit. And so we never got the Rebel Alliance. But I've always wanted to talk to you and sort of highlight Substack because you're doing the right work. You're doing the work of social media in a way that cares about governance, it cares about engagement, it cares about creating a business model that respects the users. It gets the incentives right. So I am super happy to hear about how you came to this and how you built Substack.
Well, I can tell you kind of the origin story if it's helpful.
Yeah.
And it's actually, I'll go back like one click before because this part's actually relevant. But so I was a co-founder and I was like the technical co-founder at Kik, which is a messaging app. We had kind of a crazy wild ride and massive adoption and ups and downs. But when I left, the next move the company was making was to launch what we called at the time an ICO, which tells you about when the date that was going on. And I supported that path. I thought it was a cool thing to do, but I didn't feel like I had something unique to contribute to that phase of the company. So I left. And I was taking some time off. Basically, I was taking kind of a sabbatical and doing a bunch of the things you don't have time to do when you're running a high growth startup. I was like reading books and spending time with friends and family and pursuing hobbies. And one of the things I'd always sort of had in the back of my mind, I've always been like an avid sort of reader and media consumer. I grew up in a house full of books. I've always believed that what you read matters. It shapes how you think. It shapes how you see the world. And so great writing, great media, great culture is inherently valuable. And so I was like, I should write. I should start blogging. Like, I had that good programmer's hubris. I was like, I know how to type. I know how to read. How hard could this be? And I started writing what was supposed to be a essay or a blog post or a screed or something, like outlining my frustrations with the media economy on the internet. Basically going,
I've written that same essay. Yes.
Oh yeah. There you go. And so it's, so the beats then, which is like, hey, the internet came along and smashed a lot of the business models that used to support our culture, right? The Craigslist took over the classifieds, Facebook and Google took over advertising, newspapers are dying, magazines, like all of the sort of things that used to be the things that supported the firmament are gone. And the first generation of big networks that grew up in their place and took over performed this kind of massively successful attention land grab. Where, I sometimes joke that the problem people used to have before these things were like, you could get bored. You'd be sitting around thinking like, I have some spare attention and I wish I had something free to distract me. It was like a problem you could have in the 90s or something. Mm-hmm. And, we fixed this first generation of social media platforms fixed that problem to a fault. And were massively successful. They were massively successful in gathering usage. They're massively successful in building successful businesses for themselves. But in my mind and in my screed I'm writing, they were not successful in creating an economic engine that could support great work. And they did not have the people who were making or consuming the culture as economic actors or as well aligned actors in their incentive systems. Wah goes this essay, like newspapers are dying and maybe Facebook is not good for us. And I sent it to my friend.
And we fucked up.
Yeah. I sent it to my friend Hamish, who's actually a writer, who's now my co-founder. And he kind of let me down really gently. He's like, dude, 100 people have written this essay. I'm a writer. We know newspapers are dying. You're not the first person to wonder if Facebook is good. But the more interesting question is, let's imagine all of these things you're whining about are true, are real problems. What could you do about it? How could this be different? And that was sort of the thing that led to an argument that led to, creation of Substack, the company, which is on the one hand, kind of this like ridiculously ambitious, far-reaching idea of building a new economic engine for culture, creating a different business model and social contract that allows people to like own their work and make money doing the things they believe in and fosters independence, blah, blah, blah. But was also at the same time, we kind of had this very sort of modest initial instantiation of it, which was basically paid email newsletters, which even in 2018, 2017 was unsexy technology. But it had this property.
You went back to a whole medium that was pre-Web 2.0, pre-internet, like pre-social media almost.
Yeah, it was like the actual structural insight there was, hey, if you want to be relevant on the internet right now, you have no choice but to be in one of these rectangles that's on people's phones. And it's really hard to be one of the rectangles. But if you're not in one of the rectangles, you kind of, it's people don't really surf the web anymore. Or at least that's like, going much on the downswing with sort of normal people. You have to be in one of the rectangles. Most of the rectangles have an algorithm that's working against you if you're an independent creator. And the one kind of funny, hacky exception is the email rectangle, which lots of people still have. It still exists. And you still have this old protocol that says, hey, I can give you my email and you can reach me. Which, unlike RSS readers, which is another technology people actually had and used and understood.
So you're using an internet protocol. You didn't invent your own. You're using one that people already had and that had been sort of neglected and sort of driven out. And to me, that was really inspirational because I've been trying to build new internet protocols and building protocols and getting people to adopt them and stand is very difficult. And, I've had some success. I worked on the iCal standard and I worked on OAuth, which of course has taken off, and the podcasting standards and things like that. But then when we created the original version of Twitter, we were like, well, how do we make it a protocol? And so first we built this RESTful API. People built apps and it was great. And then we were like, well, we want to make it a protocol and we didn't know how to make it a protocol. So we used Jabber, XMPP, and we had these, Twitter things, and it didn't scale. Like the technology didn't work because we were trying to do too many things. And so Twitter abandoned that. But it felt open in those early days for the first sort of, 6 or 7 years of Twitter. And then they tried to shut it down. And the reason they shut it down was so that they could monetize it, so that they could build an advertising marketplace. They wanted to control that user's experience. You guys come along like 5 years after that and say, we've lost something because of this advertising thing. And how do we get back to that protocol? It's really fascinating, the cyclical nature of it all, how we build things and then we rebuild things again. I'm wondering if you were worried about building on email as a platform, like spam filters and whether or not people would check their emails and things like that.
Yeah, the spam filter thing is real. I mean, we say, the email doesn't have an algorithm, but of course there is the Gmail, promotions algorithm and the spam filter algorithm. We actually had the funny problem from very early on that we were like the one email company that had way more people angry with us that they were expecting an email and they weren't getting it than that they were getting spam emails and were annoyed. And so a lot of our customers, a lot of our support problems were like, what the hell? I really need this email. Where is it? Why did it show up in my spam? Which in turn actually does make it easier. Like if you're sending emails that people really want and care about, the Google, the Gmail and other algorithms do a pretty good job of helping those actually make it into inboxes. It's also just a pain to develop for email, right? Like we left IE6 in the dustbin of history a long time before 2017. But if you're writing for email, you're still dealing with all the same kind of like, I don't know if you remember that era of horrible browser technology, but email clients are very much like that. And so it was kind of this like funny, kludgy hack in a lot of ways, but it was also really powerful.
So after my dream of a Rebel alliance that I was going to include Substack in without ever telling you guys, I was looking at Blue Sky and I've been doing work on the Nostr protocol and ActivityPub and sort of these open social protocols. And I kept seeing a discussion that got very deep in the weeds. And you've seen this on Substack, some of your controversies, like Casey Newton, like, which of these blogs are you guys, Substacks, are you keeping on? Are you not keeping on? And did you blog them? And are they really a neo-Nazi or are they just an alt-right sympathizer? And are you monetizing? You get very in the details. And I don't want to dig into that right now. But what I wanted to do was give people some sort of sense on what should we be asking for? Like, if you're going to consider moving from Substack to Ghost, or if you're going to consider whatever it was, the name of the Facebook Substack competitor that they launched for.
I'll remember the name forever because the name of it was Bulletin, and then they put a bullet in it.
So to a user, they're like, should I use Facebook Bulletin or should I use Substack? And they don't know what it is. And say, Meta will show up and say, well, we'll give you incentives and payments and everything else. And so I am trying to synthesize what we should be worried about. And it's not, is it VC backed or no, or is it free software or no, or, it's everything else. It's like, do you have a set of rights? Do you have privacy and security? Do you own your identity and your followers? Is it your relationships? Do you have interoperability and the right to exit, which you guys have done so well, including the payments part? Do you have transparency over control over algorithms? Because there's always algorithms. People say Substack doesn't have algorithms, but you have algorithms for all sorts of stuff. One, to get by spam filters, and two, to get by recommend new content so that you can help people build audiences. And lastly, do people get a right of self-governance inside their spaces? And so the reason I'm putting together this podcast and the reason I want to interview you is I want to talk to everyone. And I've talked to Jack Dorsey and Yoel Roth and Chris Messina, and I'm going to talk to Tony Stellovine over at Medium, and Kara Swisher, who's been covering all this, and trying to say, okay, are these the right rights? Are these the things we should be saying out? Like, what to this world of people who are using these platforms we're building should they expect? Should they demand? Should they be hoping for? And which of these things do you feel makes Substack, your relationship to the Substack creators, something that they can trust? Because you're coming in saying, you can trust us in a way that you didn't trust Meta, because Meta screwed over media publishers. They lied about viewer numbers. They, got people to shift, and then they launched Bulletin and then put a bullet in it. How do we build a better environment with the right incentives that everybody can trust to build a future on top of?
I'll give you my answer to this, because I think the idea of sort of like the rights and the what can you expect, I think that stuff really matters. You mentioned the right to exit. I think that's really important. The idea that, if I leave, I can, the whole point of Substack is this is your audience, that you can import your email list, you can export your email list. The fundamental currency is like direct connection with your audience. Yeah. That's why you pay. That's why the thing works.
It's yours.
It's not Substacks. And it's like, if it was Substacks, it wouldn't work. Like, people wouldn't want it as much. It's like, that's why it's also valuable. That's why the whole thing is different. And so I think, those things really matter. But I would say when you're thinking at the level you're looking at it, the thing I would ask is go one level up to the, if it's a commercial company, the business model, or if it's something else, kind of like the governance structure, I would ask, like, is there a plausible way to like align incentives where if you are making a company and you say, hey, we have these ideas of what would be great rights to give our users, and then we have this other way of making money, and these things pull in different directions, I think that's always going to be a recipe for pain. Because even in the best case where you're going to say, oh, I'm very principled, I'm going to sacrifice the success of my company in order to keep to my principles of the user rights, well, then you just have an unsuccessful company that kind of has probably a limited impact and is able to provide a limited service. And so to me, the like key ingredient in this puzzle has always been to design the business in such a way that in order for the business to succeed, you want to like strengthen the rights and strengthen the thing. So like a couple practical examples of this are when we were deciding, what the rules for Substack should be. We're like, you should always be able to take your audience with you. At first blush, you might say, that's bad. You have no lock-in, like people can just leave. But of course, the thing is like, once people know they can leave, A, they trust you more because you've given them like a credible reason to trust you beyond promises. And B, now the incentives for the company are like, oh, if we can't force them to stay, we actually
You've
have
got
to
a sense of accountability. Like
we have to provide value. Like we have to make it better, right? We don't have the stick. We need the carrot to keep people. We need to actually help you grow. We need to actually make great technology. Another way is the way that we decided to charge, right? I think a very natural way to charge for Substack would be charge you a big platform fee to use the thing at all. And then
the medium model.
If you make money, that's nice, right? And I think there's a real moral hazard there, where I think there are lots of people who would love to have the dream of making a successful media thing that would pay us lots of money for the dream, but then might not go on to succeed. And that could be like a great business for us, but a terrible business for them. And so we set it up from very, very early on, where we said, hey, we want to take a percentage fee. We only want to make money when you make money. It's totally free to start. You publish as much as you want. And then literally the only way that Substack can succeed is if we actually build the growth. And so our North Star metric has always been how much money are creators and writers making on Substack, because our revenue is just like linearly related to that.
It's just a ratio of that. So
it's just a ratio.
The better your authors do, the better you do.
And then and I think it's non-obvious. Like I think in the short run, if you could have another way to charge where you would make more money, where it would feel like less money to people, and people would say, oh, you're not taking a percentage, but in fact, I'm paying more than I'm making overall. So I'm paying like 130%, but I just don't think of it that way. But I think in the long run,
X dollars per subscriber or something like that.
Yeah. And then, fixed fees that add up, and then it doesn't feel like I'm paying a percentage, but it ends up being, the actual amount I pay ends up being like, again, a much higher ratio. But because it sort of we tied ourselves to the mast a little bit. We were forced to, by the structure we'd set up, we'd forced to like help the people on Substack make as much money as possible and grow as much as possible. We ended up creating way more value in the network in a way where I think the thing that Substack becomes is going to be more consequential and ultimately more valuable, because it forced the company to build the right things. And then so if you're sitting there deciding like, should I use Substack or should I use Facebook Bulletin? The way I would approach asking that is, hey, which of these companies, if they're running their company well, is going to have interests that are aligned enough with mine that this is going to be a good long-term partnership?
Yeah, that's really fascinating. And it's so important to get the economic incentives lined up. I had a conversation with Jack Dorsey in 2017 when everyone was telling him to ban Donald Trump's account. And he was like, well, I don't know what to do. I want to support free speech and I want to do this thing. And people are making really strong arguments for why I should ban Trump's account. And our discussion ended up going to the economic incentives of the platform, which was Trump on Twitter through his first presidency made Twitter front page news every single day, all the time. And so if he were to ban Twitter's character of the day every day, he's going to hurt the entire ecosystem and the platform for everyone. And there was no good answer, because they needed the advertising dollars and they needed to be in the media all the time, and they needed the connections and stuff. And the incentives of the users who didn't want Trump on there weren't aligned with the incentives of the company.
Yeah, I can see that. I come down on the other side of that. I don't think they should have banned Trump. I don't think that helped.
Well, they didn't end up banning Trump until
everyone else did.
Yeah, until everyone else did, until January 6th, until they, he was leaving office, and, did it matter then? I don't know. And he very quickly just built his own based on, a clone of Mastodon, and that's why we have True Social. One of the things I've heard you talk about in the past is the difference between subscription revenue and micropayments. And in my work on the Nostr protocol, we have this totally functional micropayment system. It's super easy to attach payments, and you can attach little, Bitcoin associated Lightning wallets, and the micropayments go back and forth. You can do likes, or you can send people payments, and you can unlock subscription payments and everything else. And it felt super easy. It's not controlled, not credit card things. And it's easy to, you can use Apple Pay to fund the wallets. But our creators who we got on found that it was really hard to build a sustainable audience. And I think you guys have built a world around subscription payments, around recurring payments. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the way in which the subscription model helps the creators plan in the future and have accountability to their audience and build real businesses and sustain themselves.
Yeah. I'm a huge micropayments bear or Grinch. I don't believe in them. I don't think they work. And I feel the same way about schemes for distributing payments based on engagement. Like, very early on in Substack's life, we had like a handful of writers on the platform, and Medium was the massive, the gorilla in the room, and everybody was like, oh, imagine one day you could be as big as Medium. But Medium would publish Medium had this system at the time. They pivoted through a bunch of things, but they had the system at the time that was, you would pay a fixed fee to the platform, and then depending on the number of claps you gave out, it would sort of prorate the money. And they would announce, they'd be like, the top earner on Medium this month made X amount of money. And we would look at it with our like 5 early customers, and we would say, hey, our best person made more money than that last month. And they make more money.
And
than
Substack's
that.
teeny at this point.
Substack's teeny at this point. And for the Medium person, that was like, they've been at this for years. They had one crazy viral hit that went out and got 1 million claps and like was their best day ever, and they'll probably never replicate it. And the person on Substack, they're making that every month, right? They have this predictable, recurring, sustainable income where their incentive now, this is, again, we're going to go back to the incentives. If you're writing in that Medium system, your incentive is to like get as many claps as possible.
Yeah.
And if you're writing in the subscription system, your incentive is to like earn and keep people's trust. Have people fall in love with you to the point where they make a conscious decision to support you, and then deliver on the thing that you promised them or that causes them to keep supporting you. And those are not 2 different ways to make money doing the same thing. The kind of thing that you make when you're playing one game, when you're playing the subscription game is better and qualitatively different than the kind of thing you want to make if you're kind of like maximizing for claps. I feel the same way about the X monetization. The like effectively monetizing for replies is like an insane incentive structure.
Yeah, I don't know if you're familiar with the startup Farcaster. They got raised $150 million from A16Z and have a social platform. And they have this weird, they have ways in which you can create groups, and then you can stake money to join the group. And then if you're bad behavior, you lose the money you stake. Like, they sort of integrated sort of monetary systems through all of their social dynamics. And the fascinating part about it is, one, you go in there and it feels very casino-like because they've gamed it all and gamed it for the wrong things. But the other was that like their user traffic is sort of going down and their revenue is just consistently going up. And so it's working for the company to get a return on investment in the short term, but people don't want to go there. They don't want to engage. It's not a sort of a healthy, happy place. It feels like walking into a casino.
It's interesting.
When you started off, it was all newsletters, all email, and then you launched Notes, and then you launched the live stuff, and you launched podcasting. And basically you've gone from, we are a newsletter platform to we are a creator platform that cultivates all of your audience. And when you started off, you had people just generating their own traffic from their newsletter, and you might have highlighted some. But Substack today, when I go to subscribe to a newsletter, it has an algorithm that suggests other related newsletters. And when I get the newsletter, you include advertisement, but advertisement for other creators at the bottom. Like, some of the newsletters I see, like, there's links to other stuff, and you might like this, you might like that. I wonder if you could talk about going from building just on an internet protocol, email, to building your own platform that is multimedia, that is trying to be everything for people, the creator.
One thing I would point, I'll correct you slightly, is
yeah, I'm happy to be corrected.
We had again, right from the start of the company, we had like the small vision and like the grandiose vision. And we always felt like it was not just going to work for writing. That this, the core thing is the model, the core thing is the relationship in the social contract. So we built like podcasting in 2019. We built video in 2022. We kind of like all along, I was always like, it's going to work. It's going to work for all these media formats. We're going to make it great. And it kind of like trucked along where it was people were doing it. And like the podcasting kind of worked actually. But it was sort of like a relatively marginal part of the platform. And then the thing that happened was as the Substack app started to take off, it all just really took off. And I think it's as simple as like, people don't really watch videos in their email, but you can make a really great video experience in the app. And so now a lot of the things that have kind of like long been part of the ambition and that we've had as features of the platform are starting to become like really meaningful parts of the business and parts of the content mix. But the core difference you're kind of pointing at there is like, there's a version of Substack you can imagine that says, hey, this is only going to be a tool for writers and creators. It's like, vintage Shopify. It's, the audience is never going to even know about Substack. This is just a tool for hosting a website and sending email and taking payments and serving a podcast and whatever else you need. And it's just going to be kind of this one-sided thing.
Sort of how people feel about Ghost. You don't know you're using a Ghost site.
It sounds good. It's like, hey, my brand is going to be forward and I've got this flexible tool. Well, the thing that we realized from very early on was in that world, you were still completely as an independent creator using that service, using a Substack that was like that or Ghost or building your own thing. You were completely dependent on the other major networks on the internet for all of your growth, all of your traffic, all of your relevance, right? Once you have subscribers, you can email them. That's great. But the only way to get subscribers, the only way to grow was to like be in the places where there's actually audience and people are actually talking. And so for us early on, that was Twitter, right? Like that was the way that people would, in order to make a successful Substack, you just had to like have a big audience on Twitter. And then one day you would send them the link to your Substack and they would all see the link and they'd click it and you'd make hundreds of thousands of dollars that day and you'd quit your job and you'd say, this is the greatest thing ever. And the thing that we realized from very early on was, okay, you're depending on these other platforms and their interests are not helping you get your audience out. Yeah. And so it's not going to be the case that everyone's going to
the incentives aren't aligned.
The incentives are not aligned, right? It's they like, and it's in just very basic ways. Like, and I even take like, it has since been the case that links get massively deprioritized on X. And I think it makes the service worse in some ways, but from like just a very basic metrics perspective, it makes total sense. If I'm scrolling through a feed that's serving me ads and I click on a link that takes me to a really wholesome 3,000 word deep dive thing that's the best thing I've read in a month and it makes my life better, well, you just tank the metrics, right? And so either from sort of malice or even just from kind of like shifting models, right? Like, or, Zuck gets mad and decides we're not going to have politics for 5 years and I'm a political newsletter. Like, what's going to happen? Or like, the LinkedIn algorithm changes overnight or the Instagram. Like, if you're going to be wholly dependent on these other platforms, you're still completely downstream from the incentive structures that they create. And so if we wanted to have this ecosystem be as valuable as possible and actually serve these people, we needed there to be a place on the internet that was incentive aligned. And we set out to build and grow that place. And it took us years. We've been working on the Substack app for years. We had a big fight with Elon about it like 2.5 years ago, whenever that was. It's kind of like we've been working on it and working on it and working on it. And it's starting to work and it's awesome.
It's so fascinating because to watch the Substack trajectory versus Patreon, where Patreon was around before you guys and was saying, okay, we'll just do the payments and we'll help the creators. And oddly enough, not give you as much right to exit because they don't, you don't own your Stripe account.
And you don't even always get the email. The email is like is a questionable thing. I think you mostly get it, but
they never built the thing for creators that help them cultivate and build your audience. My question for you, and this is a little bit of a barb, which is like, okay, I can leave with my payments, I can leave with my emails. What about the notes? What about the all of that other engagement? Is there a way in which someone who wants the right to exit gets to exit from all of this new stuff? I realize they don't get the traffic generation stuff of being on the platform, which is a huge value, but like, is there a thought on how the exit works for these other parts of the Substack ecosystem?
Yeah, I mean, I think the theory is to just make everything kind of like as exportable as possible. So you can still export your subscribers, you can still export your posts. I think you can export your comments. Like, I think we should. The goal is to make everything kind of like exportable. The idea being that you get so much benefit from being, people do leave Substack, right? The part of the proof of this is like, you can see people leave. They take their customers, they take their email lists.
And then sometimes they come back because they decide the platform is worth it.
Very often they wind up coming back. And the reason they come back is not because they weren't allowed to leave. It's like they leave, they have their customers, and their growth curve goes from this to this. And they go, oh, I've run the experiment. I see that I was actually getting a lot of value from this thing. And there's a benefit to kind of like this agglomeration effect of being in the place where this thing works. And, they come back. And to me, that's kind of like the best possible version of this thing, where it's like, there's nothing that prevents you from leaving other than we're just consistently giving value. There are some things where it's like, is everything fully like, I think the most important thing is your email list. Second most important thing is payments. Third most important thing is your content that you own. I think all of those things are fully sort of exportable. But then there's like, is everything perfect? Can you export your recommendation relationships? Can you export your, what about if somebody else like reshared your thing? Will that break? Like, you can keep the links. Like, I think you can make it so that it all works. And especially the most important pieces of it, you have the right to leave.
Yeah. Or is there a use my Substack login to someone's now post Substack site so that I can see the notes back and forth, or like these are the notes that I had, or, are you losing the user to all of that other engagement because you're cultivating a community, which is great, but like, it's like, do you lose that when you leave and it just becomes like more like the email? I mean, that's not for you guys to build. That's for you guys to accept if someone built it. It's similar to what Jay and the crew over are doing at Blue Sky. Like, they're building an open protocol, they're building it open source, but they're building the Blue Sky app and the Blue Sky system. And like, if you want to go build your own independent thing that operates in their ecosystem, they're like, you should go build it. But that's not their job. I am super curious about, where do you think things are going? Like, where do you guys want to be? And, what is the sort of role of Substack in the future?
I'll give you two big trends that I really believe in. One is, I think we're already really well in the middle of a shift in power in media, away from, kind of the legacy or the things that came before, and towards sort of independent creators, independent actors. Like, the fact that you can just be a person and go on any of these big networks and like make a thing, like, that shift to me feels that it will happen is very baked in. We're already well in the middle of it. Like, I don't need to tell you the million reasons why, but like, do we kind of get the utopian or dystopian version of that? Feels like very much still an open question to me. And the default of, if it's powered off the same incentive structures that we've had for the past decade, it feels like kind of there's a strong tug in the dystopian direction, which is part of what motivates us to work on Substack. But then the other shift that I think is really interesting is like everything that's going to happen with AI. And I think that thing causes us to have to ask almost philosophical questions about like, what is the purpose of media? What are we doing here? And my view on this is, technology tends to make things better and cheaper. But the interesting question is like better and cheaper according to whom? Like who is this serving? And I think there's going to be kind of two bifurcating futures that we see. One of which I think of as kind of like the drug future, where it's like, hey, if the purpose of media is to feel something in the moment and to satisfy kind of like, give me something that I want right now. We already live in a world where we have short form content and algorithms and, hyper addictive technologies that can kind of like scratch that itch. And I think that technology is just going to keep accelerating. You're going to be able to make, crazy AI versions of these things that if you want to kind of basically wirehead, that thing's just going to get better and better and better, better in the sense of being good along that axis. And
creating this passive consumer experience that is incredibly dopamine engaging.
Yeah, it's like a drug, right? It's the same way that it's a great product the way that heroin is a great product. It feels good, ruins your life.
I have to do this with Instagram where I have to delete Instagram off my phone. And then I want to post a story or share some stuff. So I go and reinstall Instagram because some of the things you can't post otherwise. And then I post and then I have to remember to go delete it because the web Instagram Reels is terrible and it doesn't keep me addicted. It breaks really quickly. But I don't have I have enough of addictive personality that I don't have a way of keeping myself. If it's not installed on my phone, I won't use it. But if it's on my phone, it's so easy to do there. And then like an hour or two has passed and I've seen these ads and I'm so set up to consume these ads.
I think there's going to be we're already in the thick of that. People are starting to feel it. I think that train's going to keep running. And it's just going to get on the one hand, you're going to get kind of like the more and more extreme version of that. On the other hand, as it gets more extreme, there'll be a growing counter pressure, a growing backlash, and a growing desire for something different, right? There's a sense that I want to take back my mind. And this is something that
I want the authenticity. I want the depth. I want the connection.
I want something where after I use it, I think, damn, that was cool. I'm glad I spent my time doing that rather than what am I doing? How did it get to be 3 a.m.? And, we sort of I felt when we started Substack, I felt like this was going to happen. And I feel it more strongly now. I'm I think it is happening and I think it's going to continue to happen. And so I think so the second future is the idea that media is culture. It's not just about scratching some itch in the moment. It's about, interacting with other people. It's about deciding for myself what I value. It's about, in some sense, learning what to want and acting back on society and, having some sort of meaningful human life as part of a wider thing. And I think the challenge is going to be kind of making a version of that type of media that can effectively compete with the drug media. Because you don't want to be eat your vegetables media. You don't want to be here's the boring library version.
No, you remove the algorithms.
You want it to be fun. And
then all of a
fun
sudden,
is not bad.
I just want chronological feeds. And you're yeah, but all the A/B studies and everything else shows that people don't want to sort through everything. They want engagement. They want meaningful. They want the right things.
And so this is where I would, you were asking about the algorithm and algorithmic transparency. This is our philosophy with Substack, which is look, technology is neither good nor bad. It's just powerful. And including algorithms and including short form content and including AI and you name it, whatever you're making, it's just powerful. And it's a question of sort of who it serves. And so the algorithm on Substack, our goal is not to keep you scrolling for the longest possible time. Our goal is to help you find things that you deeply engage with and value to the point where you might fall in love and pay. And the way that manifests physically is we'll run an A/B test on the algorithm. It'll say, hey, user minutes went up and scrolling went up. And if you were an ad company, you would have made more money, but reading went down and subscribing went down. What do you want to do? And we'll say, great, don't ship that one. That's bad for us. Or vice versa. More commonly, you can still get ones where it's if everything went up, that's great. But to the extent that there's a trade-off between, kind of vacuuming up more of your time in a way that doesn't actually mean rational value to you, it's easy for us to not follow that siren because it doesn't make us money.
I mean, I think that one thing Tony did after coming on board as CEO of Medium was very similar experiments and tried to change that engagement model so that it wasn't maximizing claps and maximizing that kind of thing, and trying to say, okay, what makes people, they bundle everything together in your Medium subscription, but like what makes someone want to pay for Medium, and what makes people happy about it, and what makes people engaged, and what creates a kind of quality. The thing that I think is really interesting is, before we created social media, we had a situation where we had a few gatekeepers who had access to the means of communication. And they had the printing press, they had the TV transmitter, they had the website that was very expensive to put together. And I just am so fascinated at the way in which we democratized media, and we have made it very participatory, and we've made it in a way where everybody's engaged with it. And then people have gotten upset when everybody has a voice. It's like, I had this thing, and I'm leading to a question sort of about sort of free speech or how do we do this? But 20 years ago, I was like, I am a leftist and I am for free speech because I want a society that is open and transparent and has real debate and everything else. And there are absolutely people who are out there who are doing hate speech and things like that, and I don't support them. But there's a world in which we are deeply constrained by who has a voice. And now we have a world where we have broken up that constraint. And then people are upset about some of the people having a voice. And so I'm wondering if what do you see as Substack's role in the process of democratization of the means of communication?
Yeah, I think the democratization stuff is happening, matters a lot. I sometimes joke, gatekeepers are good. We should still have gatekeepers, but the difference is they can't lock people in anymore, right? Nobody has a monopoly on saying, hey, if you don't go through this gate, you're never going to have an audience. Like, that's gone. And I think on balance, that's good. We've always taken what I consider to be quite a strong stance in favor of freedom of the press, freedom of speech. In this new economic engine for culture we're building, I think the ability of people to speak their mind, to choose what to publish, to choose what to read, to expose themselves to conflicting ideas, I think that stuff is really foundational and matters not just to a platform, but to a free society. And I think our role is, I think in the past, if you lived through the past 10 years, it would be easy to model what's happened as, okay, we gave everybody a voice, lots of bad stuff, then social media, everything was yelling at each other, everything went wrong. And so can't have free speech, very important that we constrain what everybody says, because when you have free speech, you get these disasters, these quagmires. And I think it's understandable how people come to that conclusion, but I think it's the wrong conclusion, and is a disastrously dangerous conclusion if we draw it and follow it to the end. Because my model of what happened is kind of, again, this is my hobby horse, but it's like we created these environments, these incentive structures. You can think of Twitter or Facebook or TikTok or all these places as like a mimetic evolutionary landscape, right? Where we said, hey, we're going to create this, we're going to set up a big game where not only can anybody play, but if you say the thing that makes people the maddest, you win the game.
Yeah.
And okay, so now that's more than free speech. That's saying, okay, we have free speech plus
we're incentivizing destructive speech. We're antisocial behavior.
Yeah, let's find the places where we can drop bombs on the society's fault lines to maximally, because the thing that's the most viral content is not the thing that's it's the thing that's maximally divisive, right? It's the thing that's the perfectly just enrages the out group and forces the in group to painfully rally. And we just, and we've seen the left-wing version of this play out on Twitter. We've seen the right-wing version of this play out also on Twitter. The problem is not the fact that you like gave people a platform. The problem is you created a giant game that was like, let's find the most destructive possible version of this conversation to have. And like when you create a game like that at scale, there's going to be somebody that wins, right? You're gonna like, there's going to be someone that's like, great, I'll do that. Like I know how to play that game.
And I talked to Renee DiResta and Yoel Roth on this podcast, and both of them talked about the fact that the like state-sponsored disinformation, the way in which the Russian, the Chinese, all these other folks, they go in and they try and manipulate it. Originally, they tried to make fake information. They tried to like invent stuff. And what they discovered was they should just find those tribal conflicts. They should just amplify the people who are already playing this game of like, let's break apart on these fault lines, these things that you outlined.
So now you have this. So now you've developed this game, the game to cause havoc, and you have this open platform. And then the pressure rises and says, "Oh, this thing's going off the rails. You had better come in and start censoring." Right? Oh, there's misinformation on here. Oh, there's bad actors. Oh, there's this and that. Oh, there's we can't have these politicians saying that. And then you have this like incentive game that you've created this powerful market force for discord, and then you're trying to kind of like add in top-down censorship that says you're bad, this is wrong, here's what's true. And that further sows distrust and makes people kind of like feel like there's this, it's just like a recipe for insanity. And so I think that
people are demanding takedowns. They're like, you must remove this.
Well, and like the act of demanding takedowns is the perfect social, it's like one of these like social media, like the viral cancellation is itself a highly evolved mimetic species in this evil environment. And so it's like that whole thing spins.
Yeah. So the amazing part about it is, this is the research that Renee did, the takedowns don't work. It's like we do these things that we think are right. Like, and it's similar to trigger warnings. People do trigger warnings because they think that they are being protective of stuff. If you actually talk to the academics who have researched trigger warnings, they make people who have had traumatic experiences, it triggers them. The trigger warning triggers people. And so we are doing these things that we think are helping. We think that taking down the bad content will help, or we think that providing a trigger warning will help protect people. And it turns out that the research doesn't align with that at all.
Yeah. So you asked me, I strongly agree. And there's very strong, it's so tempting to do those things. So you asked me what I think Substack's role is. Here's what I would love our role to be if we can pull it off. And I think we can. You can have free speech and a free press, and you can have civilization at the same time. Those things are actually not in fundamental logical tension. You can build a system that has both, right? You can build a system that has, a broad remit for allowing people to publish ideas, have differing viewpoints, disagree, be wrong. You can have them have the ability to choose, how to moderate their space, which communities they want to be a part of. You can construct the game in such a way that you can have both freedom and sort of quality and peace. And I believe that is possible. I believe that's actually easier than achieving those results through sort of heavy-handed moderation and censorship. And I'm determined to prove with Substack through its existence that we can build something like that.
I think that is such a wonderful way to wrap this up. Thank you so much for your time. I have a couple questions that I ask folks. One is, who should I be talking to? Who should be included in this conversation about what we're doing with social media, what kind of rights, what are the creators, what are the economic incentives, what are the political and technological and economic systems that we should be building for that society that both sustains civilization and freedom to participate, freedom to associate, freedom of speech.
Two people that I talk to about this, I don't know if they're the right in the globe, but two people that I find very interesting on this topic. One is Noah Smith.
Oh yeah, he's amazing. I just listened to your your live stream, your conversation with him. Noah and I don't agree politically on a lot of things, but he's incredibly brilliant and insightful, and I love hearing reading his stuff. And it's really neat to hear him transition to doing video and doing podcasts, because I think a couple years ago, I'm like, oh, I want to listen to Noah's podcast, and it didn't exist at the time. So yeah, absolutely.
He's a great one. Another person I talked to, speaking of people you may not agree with politically, I find Mark Andreessen fascinating on all these topics. He's just has been around the internet a long time and has strong opinions. And I imagine you're doing this, but it's probably worthwhile talking to some people that really take the other side of this, right? Maybe go talk to someone that's thinks we should have really strong moderation, and the free internet was a huge mistake, and the First Amendment should burn in a fire. I'm sure you can find someone like that.
Yeah, that'll be an interesting one. It definitely is important to talk to people you disagree with. And one of the things, I live in New Zealand, and they just started a campaign to try and ban minors from social media,
which in practice turns into like papers, please, for the whole internet.
Exactly. There's this idea that somehow we can protect minors and not have to give everyone's IDs and register it. And they're like, well, okay, that maybe minors can use it. You just need like their parent or guardian. And then now we've got a giant database of who is the legal parent and guardian of whom in the whole country. And what happens when a tourist visits from overseas? Do they no longer get to use social media when they're visiting your country? It's like this weird, simplistic solution to the problem, similar to the takedowns, and then it makes things much worse. I have one question which I forgot to ask you, which is, a bunch of people said, if you keep some alt-right creators on your platform, that Substack will become a Nazi bar. How do you prevent Substack from becoming a Nazi bar while also deciding your chosen lines about what content you'll host and what you won't?
I guess I kind of have two answers to this. Back to kind of like, look, you can have freedom and civilization. One is just you hold the line consistently and you kind of wait. And something that I've found over the past year, if you're kind of a consistent advocate for freedom of the press, you will unfortunately have occasion to quarrel with every party and every side of the political spectrum and every movement. And I would say in the past 6 months, I've had a large number of people who were previously very critical of our stance on allowing, unpopular views to be published, who now feel like they need themselves to avail themselves of that and say, hey, I was a strident caller for other people to be platformed. Now I'm in a position where those calls are being made for me. Maybe I was fired. Maybe I'm experiencing. We just published this thing today about somebody who was turned away at the border for a Substack post where they, for relatively milquetoast criticism of kind of U.S. foreign policy, got detained and kind of like hassled and sent home at the border. Can't come to America if you publish like the wrong blog post. So I'm kind of like, I think given time, people will often see the wisdom in a robust and sort of like nonpartisan commitment to these things, because eventually, these things, it's really not
it comes
a one-sided
around.
issue. It comes around. And then the other thing is just like, look, we can make it good. Substack it's really good. There's a lot of great stuff there. If anything, if I would say if there's like an actual, these things, it's like an index fund of culture. So you get different things at different times. When crypto was really hot, there's a lot of crypto people. Right now, there's a lot of like normie resistance libs on Substack living their absolute best lives and being making a lot of money and having a massive impact and generating an audience. Like, it just works. It's working really well.
I'm so glad to hear it. I'm so excited for the success of Substack and excited to see what you do in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And good luck with your project too. This is very exciting.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thanks again to Chris Best for coming on Revolution.Social. Our intro and outro music is a remix of the Italian anti-fascist song Bella Ciao, courtesy of White Records.
This episode was edited and produced by Eric Johnson from lightningpod.fm, and our executive producer is me, Alice Chan, from Flock Marketing.
To learn more about the Social Media Bill of Rights and sign up for our email newsletter, visit Revolution.Social.
And for more interviews like this, follow Revolution.Social on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Nosters, Fountain.fm, or wherever you get your podcasts.
And to paraphrase the Zapatistas Subcomandante Marcos, we need a social media revolution to make revolution possible. We'll be back next week. See you then.